We are looking at the essentials, part 19, essential oils, their history and their use. So just a reminder that the information provided here is educational in nature, and it's just another set of tools to put in your wellness toolbox to help keep you well or get you well, whatever the case may be. It's not to be considered medical advice, but that you should always do your own due diligence and research any modality or treatment or idea that comes along your way. Be Berean about it. And it's not exhaustively comprehensive, but we are looking at it at some level of detail. So tonight, we're going to look at sandalwood. Santalum album is the genus and species name for the sandalwood. And it's been used for thousands of years. The Hindus have used it for religious ceremonies, Egyptians for embalming. It's actually the wood that is the aromatic component that is utilized. It's a native of Asian tropical regions. It's also known as the East Indian sandalwood, and it can be up to 30 feet tall. Looking at it, it looks a little bit like we would have around here as the madrona tree. And it's an evergreen, the madrona is, and it can be over 30 feet tall. So that's what I would have it analogous to. Madrona has some medicinal properties and so forth, but they're not the same. It's just what we have in the Pacific Northwest that appears in a similar fashion. It has a higher fragrance the older the tree gets, so the wood becomes more aromatic as it ages. Some of the things that are attributed to the aromatic qualities of the sandalwood are calmness, clarity, mental clarity, and also cardiovascular support, among other things that we'll look at here as we go through learning about sandalwood. So the part that's used is the wood, and it's actually a steam distillation process that is utilized to extract it. And the key components are alpha and beta santol, which is actually an alcohol. You can see that in the larger picture there. The OH group, hydroxyl group, is characteristic of alcohols. But again, remember that that's just a chemical name based on the hydroxyl group and not necessarily an intoxicating substance. As we know, ethanol or other alcohols. Ethanol is not necessarily a consumption alcohol. That's the one that's used as an additive in gasoline today to extend it. But there's also alpha and beta santalene. And there's actually several different forms of that. You can see the alpha and beta in the small picture there on the right. They have kind of an interesting three-dimensional ring form, but also an epi and an exo alpha and beta forms in addition to that. So if you're trying to synthesize these compounds, you can end up with many different molecular forms of them. You can have isomers that are left-handed and right-handed. You can have alpha and beta. And that basically is changed on how the different molecular components are organized and arranged, although the chemical formula is very similar, if not the same. It's just the beta and alpha determines how it's organized. But the body and the plants, they make them, they recognize them in specific ways, but when you go trying to synthesize them synthetically, you get lots of additional things, or can get additional things, or non-bioactive components that aren't recognized and utilized in the same way and can actually be toxic sometimes. So that's the danger in trying to pharmacologically derive some of these things as opposed to using them in their natural native forms. So safety for sandalwood, it can be used neat. You should always test anything you're going to use individually because there can be individual sensitivities. And sometimes people will have a sensitivity to sandalwood. And then if so, you want to be sure that you use a carrier oil to dilute it and allow it to not be in direct contact in its extra strength or high strength. So the key properties of sandalwood are anti-inflammatory, anti-carcinoma. So carcinoma is particularly noted in connection with skin cancers, but there's some other cancers that it has found some bioactivity against. Astringent in nature, so that's tissue drawing together. Anti-depressant, so that's the mental clarity component, calming, and sedative properties. And we'll look at some additional ways that those come into play as well. So some specific uses. It's useful topically applied as an oil or in shampoos as a way to mitigate dry scalp and dry skin. It also is helpful in helping to diminish scarring and blemishes. So putting it topically directly on the area, like a small wound, you probably would want to use it carefully on the face. If you're using it there, just be careful with anything you put on your face. Just do it with care. But blemishes usually refers to something like acne or some other skin imperfection of the face in particular, but they can be found around the body. It can be calming and relaxing. So aromatically diffusing it in the air can have a relaxing effect. And you can also get that same effect by applying it underneath your nose on your upper lip. So that's basically putting it in a place where you can aromatically inhale it directly as you're walking around and not be confined to a room where it's being diffused through a diffuser. So wound care and skin infections can be helpful, just applying it to the area where there are concerns, and spasms and cramps. So if someone's having muscle spasms, a spasm typically is in conjunction with smooth muscle, so intestinal muscle or stomach muscle that are moving out of sync with what you're accustomed to and creating pain. Cramps are more in line with skeletal muscle. So cramps can occur when there has been excessive use or dehydration associated with it. But putting the essential oil of sandalwood over can help those spasms or cramps. It's also helpful in connection with cancers and some tumors, and internally can be used in a capsule or mixed with water. It's interesting that it was noted in a 1997 study in the European Journal of Cancer Prevention that its chemoprotective properties and effects were specific with connection with skin cancers. So there's a couple compounds, sesquiterpenes are important. Sandalwood has long been used by traditional herbalists to make skin pastes that are healing. And it appears that these have help in treating skin papillomas. It's also based on the study findings, which showed that sandalwood oil decreased papilloma frequency by 67% when used on the skin. The sandalwood used on the skin. So it may be protective against various forms of skin cancer. And this was from chemoprotective effects of sandalwood oil on skin papillomas in mice in particular. So it was using an animal model to look at that in the European Journal of Cancer Prevention back in 1997. So that's specific to carcinomas and skin cancer, but there's some other places that have been noted through the research that have been helpful. Looking at bladder cancer, and especially combined with frankincense. So it has a synergistic effect when associated with frankincense. So heat shock proteins and histone core proteins were activated by frankincense essential oil, whereas negative regulation of protein kinase activity and G protein coupled receptors were activated by sandalwood essential oil treatment. So those are the authors of the paper that is being cited here. And the frankincense essential oil had a selective cancer cell death via the NRF2 mediated oxidative stress pathway. And sandalwood essential oil induced non-selective cell death via DNA damage and cell cycle arrest. So when we say cell cycle arrest, that's part of the process of mitosis or cellular division, and cells that are tumor producing continue to grow, and the mass can begin to create pressures and take up space and resources of the body, energy, and something that arrests the cell cycle will arrest cell division or stop it mid-cycle. So you have mitosis, and then you have proliferation phases that have various areas or places that they can be disrupted. So it actually caused some DNA damage in those cells that were cancerous. And it's interesting that it actually has the ability to target that. So this is a bladder cancer. It's an internal cancer. Differential effects of selective frankincense essential oil versus non-selective sandalwood. So looking at using them in combination. So it's an essential oil on cultured bladder cells. Chinese Medicine 2014. Also noted its benefit in Alzheimer's disease, so using it internally. So it is helpful in helping to sharpen memory and increase memory clarity. So it functions by not only helping the immune system and supporting the immune system, but it helps with mental clarity in that regard. So a capsule or in water. Insomnia and restlessness. So someone who can't sleep well or is just having a really tough time sleeping. Topical application of the bottoms of the feet can be helpful. Aromatically diffusing in the room can also help move someone towards restful sleep. And there's lots of different things that can cause insomnia. Sometimes it's just having an overactive mind that's working on a particular issue or problem that keeps one awake. And there can be other things too, like eating at the wrong time, too late, or a type of food that keeps you awake. So there's lots of different underlying bases for that. Memory enhancement and clarity. So aromatically diffusing the sandalwood into the room that you're in can be helpful. And it can also, again, like we said before, underneath the nose, 2 to 3 drops, or on the wrists, something that you're going to have with you that can, like your body part, you're going to be having it with you, right? So it's going to be allowing the vaporization or aromatic release of sandalwood. It can also help boost low testosterone, and that can be used in a topical way in various lotions or deodorants that are homemade. It's anti-inflammatory, so it reduces bloating and swelling, can help decrease cytokine production. So cytokines are a class of chemicals that are particularly elevated and are a biomarker for inflammation. So you may not even know that you particularly have inflammation, but if there is a test for the biomarkers and they're elevated, you are certain to have inflammation that is somewhere hiding out in your body. The underlying basis of cardiovascular disease is inflammation, and actually they've been pinning most all disease processes to an inflammatory basis. So topically, you can apply 3 to 5 drops on the area of whatever issue you're having with inflammation. It also helps aid healthy blood pressure levels. So topically apply it to the chest, the wrists, the nape of the neck, and it helps to decrease systolic blood pressure. So you can see that there's a range of different blood pressure. The systolic is the higher pressure. It's the pressure that your blood vessels are sustaining under pressure when the heart is pumping. The diastolic is during the rest and relaxation stage in between beats. So a typical normal blood pressure is less than 120 over less than 80, 120 over 80 or less. And then you begin to move into different zones of prehypertension, hypertension, and then to hypertensive. But if you have too high of an elevated blood pressure, you can risk having blood vessels bursting and other serious heart issues associated with that. So as a natural deodorant or cologne, you can topically use it in a mix, or you can use it just as the oil straight. We refer to that as neat. So a recipe for making your own deodorant is 10 drops of sandalwood oil, essential oil, 4 tablespoons of coconut oil, 4 tablespoons of baking soda, and 4 tablespoons of cornstarch. And then mix and store that in the fridge. The directions weren't completely instructive as to the fact of whether or not you actually put the coconut oil into a warming situation where you would liquefy it and then add the soda and starch to it along with the oil. My hunch is that you probably would, otherwise you're going to end up with an uneven mix. But you would mix that and then store it in the fridge, and it would become solid because of the coconut oil, which then could be used as a deodorant. And they do make some commercially prepared varieties as well. It kind of has a woodsy aromatic quality associated with it. So some additional research, they looked at in anti-cancer reviews in 2015, June of 2015, the anti-cancer effects of sandalwood, Santha et al. And then again, we looked at alpha santalol, which is one of the compounds that is specific to sandalwood. A derivative of sandalwood oil induces apoptosis in human prostate cancer cells. So apoptosis is what all cells normally have. That's called programmed cell death. and all cells have a lifespan and will eventually terminate, but then they have a replacement process through mitosis and meiosis in the gametes, but in mitosis in regular cells are constantly replacing our tissues. So over the course of a lifetime, we'll have multiple layers of skin, and other multiple organs will be renewed through the cellular process. That's how we can recover from toxicities and other challenges, because we're constantly renewing ourselves, and we need to support that process. Cancer typically is a arresting of that apoptosis mechanism and allowing the cells to grow and reproduce unchecked. And this is one way that alpha-santol in sandalwood that induces apoptosis or reinitiates that process, particularly in prostate cancer cells, is what they were studying, causing the caspase-3 activation. So that was back in 2012 in phytomedicine. And a quote from the abstract about this particularly: the alpha-santol induced apoptotic cell death and activation of capsase-3 was significantly attenuated in the presence of pharmacological inhibitors of capsase-8 and capsase-9, capase. In conclusion, the present study reveals the apoptotic effect of alpha-santol in inhibiting the growth of human prostate cancer cells. So that could be really good news for someone who is fighting prostate cancer situation. And another one from 2013, anti-neoplastic effects of alpha-santol on estrogen receptor position and estrogen receptor negative, positive and negative breast cancer cells through cell arrest at the G2 M phase. So the G2 and M phase, growth 2 is what G2 stands for, and that's during the phase of the cell that's growing. And then the M is the mitotic phase, and induction of apoptosis. So it's also indicated for both estrogen receptor positive and estrogen receptor negative breast cancer cells, because there are different types of breast cancer that respond differently. Some are estrogen sensitive and others come from different sources. So using the sandalwood could be a beneficial way of addressing that from a multiple hit perspective. So taken together, this is a quote from the abstract. This study for the first time identified strong anti-neoplastic effects of alpha-santol against both estrogen receptor positive and estrogen receptor negative breast cancer cells. So that's what the ER stands for. So essentially this diagram here shows up in the upper left an estrogen molecule coming in and tagging to the estrogen receptor, and then the estrogen receptor goes down and has an effect in the nucleus and actually functions to trigger different protein-specific manufacture from the DNA in the cells. So it works on both estrogen positive, which would be, they would be responding to estrogen, or estrogen negative types of cells.
To be aware of new videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Preparing for the Time of Trouble channel. For more free videos and downloadable audio podcasts, as well as handouts, go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. Topic categories include recordings of live seminar presentations, country living, sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, how to be self-sufficient when the grid goes down, wild edible and medicinal plants, hydrotherapy, and end-time Bible prophecies. To take advantage of these free resources, go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.